guys, it's Danny. Today we have some awesome updates to look at. Since the new year brings a new lockdown, there's no place to go, no flower shop to visit, no orchid to purchase. And you know what? That's okay, because the orchids we already have deserve some love. And we're gonna look at some orchids that are not new in my collection, but they just make me so happy, and they remind me why I collect orchids and why I'm in the hobby. Even though purchasing new orchids is so exciting and instantly they change your mood, the core of the hobby is enjoying our existing collection. So that's exactly what I'm doing. I'm gonna show you some orchids which are doing some very exciting things at the moment. They deserve some love and attention. So don't forget to give this video a like if you end up enjoying it, and why not subscribe? I post 3 times a week. Oh no! I just discovered a snail. Oh no, I know why. This orchid had a lot of roots, and when I repotted it, I did spray it with hydrogen peroxide, but the more roots you have, the more prone you are to just miss some spaces, so yeah. First off, my one and only, for now, Stanhopea. This is the Stanhopea wardii. I purchased it at this point, I think more than a year ago. And I potted it in this basket, which you can see has a lot of ventilation, a lot of slits, even on the bottom. And this is because Stanhopeas do have a very neat little quirk. Typically, they send out their flower spikes beneath the pseudobulbs. So basically, if you keep them potted, the flower spikes might end up just getting stuck in the pot, not being able to come out of the pot, and pretty much you would lose out on the flowers. So that's why people use baskets with Stanhopeas, since most of the times the flower spikes will come out through the sides or through the bottom of the basket. And well, since I don't have my Stanhopea for all that long, I cannot say that I am able to distinguish how a new growth looks like in comparison to a flower spike. So recently I noticed that my Stanhopea is growing something, which initially I thought was new growth. But then I kept waiting around for it to leaf out, and it kind of never did. So now I am wondering if by chance these could actually be flower spikes, and for whatever reason they decided to just emerge from the top of the basket. One of them actually grew on the side of the basket, pretty much hitting the wood, so I'm guessing even if it wanted to go downwards, it just couldn't, so maybe that's why it's emerging from the top. I'm not entirely sure, but I can tell you this makes me really excited, because Stanhopeas are some of those mythical orchids for me. I see them in pictures or videos, but I just cannot imagine how it would be to have one in front of me. So I'm really excited about what I see, but then again, there really is a high chance these are new growths and not flower spikes. So if any of you have more experience with Stanhopeas than I do, let me know in a comment down below, what do you think these are? Do you think they're definitely new growths, or could there be some hope for spikes? Actually, that's one of the things that I love about orchid growing. Whenever you have a new orchid and you don't know what to expect, you just go on Google and research pictures and ask people, what do you think this is? Is it a new flower spike or a growth? What is it? It's an exciting time. So orchids are not really all that boring from this point of view. There's always a effort and then reward type of experience with them, right? Am I the only one? Next up, an orchid that I've owned for the past 6 years, maybe 7 at this point, I don't even remember. It was amongst the first Schwerter orders that I ever did. This is the Epidendrum stamfordianum, and ever since I saw the picture of the blooms, I knew I wanted to own it. But the thing is, because it's such an old orchid in my collection, obviously it went through all of my beginner mistakes. And not only the mistakes, but also the period in which I didn't really know how to handle things, such as spider mites. Yeah, this guy caught the spider mice. Spider mice? No, spider mites. Can you imagine mice that look like spiders? Okay, so he went through the spider mite situation that I had about 7 years ago, and for an entire year I didn't know how to handle. It got dramatic, but now I know. Details down below in the description. Then he traveled with me through the switching of countries. Then he didn't have a medium for a while. Then he went through the inorganic medium, then this, then the other, and so on and so forth. Practically, he's been set back ever since I purchased it. And here we are, 7 years later, finally in bloom. And it's not even the full potential. This orchid can create a beautiful cascade of blooms. But what's more interesting about it is that the flower spike actually grows from the bottom of the plant, from the base of the pseudobulb. And even more so, I discovered recently that it started to produce roots at the base. So pretty much it is a sort of modified new pseudobulb structure, maybe something of the sorts. I'm expecting the new growth to start from this pseudobulb, not the one behind it. My bottom line is, this orchid has been with me through a lot of things, and it just makes me love it and appreciate it even more. And it's about this particular individual, not the species necessarily itself. I don't think I would feel the same way for another individual from the same species. And that's another thing that I love with orchids. Some of these are just so close to my heart as individuals that I don't think I could ever part ways with them, because they are a piece of me or a piece of my history. Does that make sense? Do any of you feel that way? I don't know, but I have to say I do love this feeling that orchids give me. Next up, here's a very interesting one. This is Howeara lava burst, and some of you might remember it. I've had it for the past 4 years or so. I almost lost it at some point because it simply didn't adapt to my inorganic setups or the media that I tried, so I just eventually put it in organic medium and it started to take off. However, in all of these years in which it did good for me in the various organic setups that I had it, right now is the best she's ever been. I decided to go back to one of the first organic media or setups actually in which I kept it, and this is self-watering with a medium of sphagnum moss and a top layer of bark. You don't see the sphagnum moss, but inside here there's only moss. I did not compact the moss. You know my technique. I tend to make it very, very fluffy, very airy, because it can be very easy to compact it and suffocate roots, but if you know how to fluff it up, it's pretty great. So that's how I've been keeping it for the past 6 months or so, and the new growth is the biggest one it ever grew. And I'm guessing the flower show will be spectacular as well. Now, this orchid did bloom in the past and it did grow pretty nicely, but you can see in the back, the pseudobulbs are nowhere near the size of the newest one. I was not aware this orchid can actually be so big. I thought it was a pretty tiny orchid, but no. So what I did differently, of course, is to change the setup into something that I knew it liked. And also I included some slow release fertilizer inside. And actually this was one of the orchids I featured in a video that I filmed about slow release fertilizer and about high K fertilizers, but then never ended up publishing it because, well, stuff happened to the footage. Meaning it got deleted. That happens sometimes. I'm not careful sometimes. So I couldn't actually publish it. I did talk about how high K fertilizers, actually high potassium fertilizers, a few months back in a different video, and why I prefer to use them other than bloom boosters and things of the sorts. And I have to say, I love the result, and I do believe the flower show will be great. Now, here is a thought that came to my mind now. Sometimes we have orchids that seem to thrive, and they seem to flower, they seem to do great. And because they appear to grow at their full potential, we don't actually wonder if this is adequate, if this is how this plant is supposed to grow. If it blooms and it looks good and it's not sick, it's pretty much all we care about, right? Well, now I'm wondering how many of my orchids are actually not showing their full potential because they just didn't have the proper setup to do so. And by this, I don't necessarily mean the way that I pot them. That's less important. Pretty much a setup is important in order to get the ratio between air and water correctly, and of course to facilitate nutrient absorption. But what about the nutrients? Have I fertilized my orchids enough? Did I give them the things they wanted or they needed? I don't know, because they've always looked good. But what if they can look better? And certainly the Howeara looks better. The only thing I can think of is that I just made sure it had fertilizer at all times, because yes, I do fertilize, and yes, the MSU is great, but sometimes, you guys, life happens, and I just don't have the time of day to prepare fertilized water, because that adds half an hour, let's say, to my routine, which, you know, that half an hour is important sometimes. So sometimes I skip on fertilizing, and I think it's no big deal. Now I think it's a big deal. So that's why I'm adding slow release fertilizer to all of my orchids. And here we are, 8 years or more later, 8 years on YouTube, I'm still learning. And it's great, and I can never get bored of orchid growing for this reason. There's always something to learn and discover. I think I'm gonna theme this update session as the best things about orchid growing, or the things that I like the most. Next up, we have a Vanda. Now this is a NoID Vanda, which is supposed to be pink, and I actually received it from one of you guys, a lovely lady living in Poland that told me she didn't really have the best conditions for it, and she thought it would do better in my climate. As you guys know, my climate is pretty hot, and Vandas really do like things hot and sunny. And well, here's an update. It's going to bloom, and I cannot be more excited. Although I think I know how it's going to look like. If it's one of the pink flower shop Vandas, I think it might actually be the Puanani pink or the Princess Mikasa pink. But still, I am just excited because guess what? I do enjoy NoID orchids just as much as the pedigree, if you want, orchid, I don't know how to call them, the identified orchids, the ones with a tag. And especially because this one has emotional value for me, or sentimental value now. I'm so happy to see it in bloom and doing well because it has been entrusted to me, and I really don't like letting people down. And while yes, sometimes orchids can be unpredictable, and since they're living things, we cannot fully control them, I always have a feeling of accomplishment, especially with an orchid that I received, whenever it's thriving, whenever it's blooming. And who doesn't need a little validation sometimes? Who doesn't need the feeling of achieving and accomplishing something, right? Well, orchid growing really does give you that feeling. Maybe if not at the beginning when you're still learning, after a while when things start to run smoothly and you get the hang of things, and it's the best feeling ever. So yeah, I just wanted to give you a little update on this, well, not little Vanda, quite a large Vanda. She really enjoys being potted, and we are going to see some beautiful flowers very, very soon. Next up, she's a big lady. This is a Gongora orchid that I purchased a while back. Excuse my Ash is taking a bath. This is the Gongora quinquenervis. I'm not entirely sure if I pronounced that correctly. And judging by how fast it's growing, she's gonna outgrow this orchid pot in a while. But I'm seriously thinking of actually maintaining a certain size with this orchid. I'm gonna see about it. But can you see what she's doing lately? I think it's pretty obvious. Yes, we're gonna have beautiful dragon-like blooms very, very soon. Currently, I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 flower spikes. There might be more that are just growing. They're not all the same size. So I'm thinking the show will be fantastic. The downside of Gongoras is that their flowers don't typically last all that long. They are related to Stanhopeas. And if you guys know Stanhopeas, they don't last all that long in bloom either. They typically bloom once a year. But I just love how the display of blooms puts them in the spotlight. They really do look like birds or dragons or things of the sorts. I did used to have a Gongora before this one that looked like that. I lost that one. Now I have the Galeata, which doesn't really look like a typical Gongora. So I cannot tell you how happy I am that this one is doing so great. I opted for the orchid top because Gongoras typically have the tendency to just lay their flower spikes flat, and typically they don't have very sturdy flower spikes. If you look at the Galeata, which was in bloom recently, you would have seen how flimsy the flower spike was. So I was thinking that the flower spike can grow horizontally and then just find its way in between these ridges and just look pleasant sticking out of the pot. Well, this orchid actually has pretty sturdy flower spikes, but it might be that when the flowers open, the spikes will become heavy and they will start to lean. In any case, I feel like the setup was really, really good for it, and you can see this particular one is really leaning, and when the flowers will open and the spike will become heavy, it will start to do this motion. And at that point, I do believe this pot will be very suitable and will look really good. We'll see. But yeah, you guys, I'm so happy to see this orchid proliferating like this. I feel like Gongoras are actually not very hard to maintain orchids in a home environment. I really don't do anything special for it. They are pretty thirsty plants, but they're not that sensitive to drought in my opinion, and they just produce. So I might actually look into some more Gongora type orchids because I feel like they will be very, very rewarding to grow. And the last orchid that I'm gonna show you is this pretty little thing here. This is my Leptotes bicolor that I potted in this swan pot. And look at that, she looks wonderful right here in between the little swan feathers. Yeah, I have a big imagination. And hold on, I actually have a swan of my own. Look, honey, it's your cousin. Do you recognize her? Yes, I know you're a dove and she's a swan, but you kind of look very similar, don't you? So my Leptotes has done really, really beautifully in this setup, and furthermore, I do believe it will bloom. I think I see two little sheets that are swelling up. I think a flower spike will develop in there, and this just goes to show you that if you are careful how you set up your your pot, your medium, and all of that, you can actually be quite creative with the way you display your orchids. You are not necessarily bound to the transparent pot, which is actually very useful for beginners. It is useful to see when the medium gets dry, how the roots are growing. If you're not sure how to read your orchid, let's say on the surface, then transparent pots are the way to go, and I still use them for the vast majority of my orchids. But from time to time, I love having a decorative piece such as this one, and if I'm a little careful with how I maintain it, really there shouldn't be any type of problem with growing orchids, even in something like this, if you really like it. So apart from discovering new orchids, new species or hybrids, which is always fun, there's also a part of trying out other setups or using those setups which are more decorative or the ones that you like the most. Since these orchids are epiphytic, I feel like they give quite a lot of flexibility when it comes to their display. You're not locked in to soil. You can put an orchid on a wall and it should be fine. Did you see my Phalaenopsis with their roots growing on the wall? Yeah. If I would water that wall, they would grow on the wall. So not sure if you could grow African violets on the wall like that. Just saying. So there we are, the little swan setup doing great. And when this orchid will bloom, it will have beautiful white flowers that I think will just match up this container really, really well. So that is about it for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you've enjoyed this. Subscribe to my channel for more orchid videos, tutorials, experiments, updates, and other fun orchid subjects. If you wish to support the channel, do consider becoming a member or visit the merch store linked down below in the description. You can also follow me on Instagram and Facebook. It's always nice to stay in touch there as well. And I'll see you next time. Bye!